The day I came home to find my pool completely empty was the day the Homeowners Association declared war. Not with words, not with meetings or letters, no. They did it with a silent, sneaky sabotage. I stood at the edge of the drained concrete basin, jaw clenched, my blood boiling under the Arizona sun. They didn't even leave a note. Just a dry crater where my weekend peace used to be. The ringleader? Lorraine Eddington, president of the Sycamore Bluffs HOA and the self-proclaimed gatekeeper of neighborhood standards. Middle-aged, always overdressed for any occasion, and permanently offended by the mere existence of other people's happiness. She'd been gunning for me ever since I installed the pool last summer, claiming I disrupted the visual harmony of the neighborhood. Whatever that meant. I'm Vincent Rourke, 43, divorced, HVAC contractor by trade, and not exactly the kind of guy who backs down when someone messes with my stuff. I bought this house 2 years ago with the money I saved busting my back in attics and crawl spaces for 2 decades. That pool was my reward. My own little slice of calm. And they drained it. Without notice. Without reason. Without permission. I walked straight into my house, yanked open the filing cabinet, and pulled out the HOA bylaws. I knew them better than most thanks to Lorraine's constant threats. And like I thought, there was nothing, absolutely nothing that allowed them to access or alter anything on my property without a vote, a warning, and written consent. I stormed down Sycamore Lane to the HOA office, just a glorified shed with an air conditioner unit the size of a mini fridge, and slammed the door open. Lorraine was behind the desk, sipping out of a mug that said, "I run this place. Vincent," she said with that fake southern sweetness that always made my skin crawl. "Can I help you?" "You drained my pool, Lorraine," I said, trying hard to keep from tearing that mug out of her hand and chucking it across the room. "Without notice. Without approval. That's destruction of private property." She blinked innocently. "Oh, that little thing? The board voted on it. We deemed it a safety hazard." "There is no board, Lorraine," I snapped. "Just you and your little entourage of busybodies. And even if there were, you'd still need to notify me. That's the law." "I don't think you understand how things work here," she said, setting her mug down. "Our community has standards. And when someone puts up an eyesore like that monstrosity, we have to take action." I leaned on the desk. "You just admitted to trespassing and damaging my property. I got cameras, Lorraine. You and your termite squad came through the side gate at 3 in the morning. I even have footage of Marla tripping over my rake." Her face twitched. I turned and walked out without another word. Let her stew on that. Back home, I copied the footage to a secure drive and made some calls. First to my lawyer, then to the city inspector. I wasn't just going to sue the HOA, I was going to shut them down. The next morning, I got a letter duct taped to my front door. Real professional. It read, "Due to ongoing violations and failure to comply with community appearance guidelines, you are hereby fined $1,000 per day until the pool structure is removed." I laughed out loud. Then I went to my garage and started planning. You see, one small detail worked in my favor. When I moved in, I had my own utility line extensions installed because I work with HVAC systems and didn't want to rely on HOA-managed infrastructure. My water, power, and even internet came through independent lines. But the HOA office? They ran all their utilities through a shared access box on the rear corner of my property. They never asked permission. I let it slide until now. I filed the lawsuit by noon that day. Vandalism, trespassing, property destruction, and I had the evidence to back it all up. But more than that, I filed an emergency injunction to block all access to my land, including the utility hub. The court date was 3 weeks out, but the injunction was approved within 48 hours. I installed a 6-foot privacy fence around my backyard, padlocked the gates, and posted a legal notice on the access point. Private property. No trespassing. Authorized access only. By the following Monday, the HOA office was running on fumes. Literally. They lost power first, then water, then the Wi-Fi went out completely. Lorraine came by in person, red-faced and furious, marching up my driveway like a cartoon villain. "You can't do this," she shrieked. "You're cutting off essential services." "Correct," I said, calmly sipping lemonade on my porch. "To my property." which you illegally tapped into. I've already notified the city utility board. They'll be out this week to reroute your access after you submit the right permits. Which, by the way, you never did. You're vindictive, she hissed. This will go on your permanent record with the HOA. I grinned. There won't be an HOA much longer. She turned and stormed off. I watched her stomp back to her now airless shed of an office, probably already drafting her next passive-aggressive memo by candlelight. Later that night, my neighbor Greg swung by. He'd lived here longer than anyone, a retired firefighter with no love for the HOA. I heard what happened, he said, handing me a beer. About damn time someone stood up to them. You'd be surprised how many people are ready to, I said. He sat down beside me. Good, because if you need signatures, I'm the first one with a pen. I already had a plan. And Lorraine had no idea how many people were ready to see her little empire crumble. 2 days after I shut off the utilities, the neighborhood started buzzing like a kicked hornet's nest. Not at me, at Lorraine. Word had gotten around fast and people started connecting the dots. The HOA office had no power, no water, and no internet because they'd illegally hooked into private property. That shook people. If the board could violate property lines that easily, what else had they done? I hadn't even made the full case public yet, but the evidence I had was airtight. I wasn't just building a lawsuit, I was building a reckoning. On Thursday morning, just after sunrise, I was in my workshop rewiring a condenser unit when I heard the knock. Not a neighbor, not a solicitor. Slow. Heavy. Rhythmic. I opened the door to find 2 police officers, one in uniform, one in plain clothes, standing on my porch. The one in uniform adjusted his sunglasses as he looked at me. Mr. Rourke. Yeah. What's going on? We're following up on a report of illegal surveillance equipment and threats made against a community organization, the plainclothes officer said. We've been asked to perform a welfare check and inspect your property. I stared at them. Let me guess, Lorraine Eddington filed the complaint? The uniformed officer didn't reply directly. Mind if we take a look around? I stepped aside. Not at all. Everything's on camera. They walked the perimeter, took notes, asked a few generic questions. When they saw the signs posted on the fence around the utility junction box, the plainclothes officer narrowed his eyes. You filed a civil claim? Sure did. Full evidence packet submitted to Superior Court. I also gave a copy to the City Utilities Department for the unauthorized tap. I'm protecting my property, not spying on anyone. He nodded slowly. We'll be filing a report. If it turns out you're correct about the tap-in, that could fall under utility fraud. Glad you said it, I said. They left without incident. 15 minutes later, an email pinged from my lawyer, Dana. Apparently, Lorraine had just filed an emergency motion to dismiss my injunction. The court rejected it immediately. No grounds. No merit. And now she'd drawn more legal attention to herself. That afternoon, I got a call from someone I didn't expect, Councilman Jacob Reyes. He represented our district and was up for re-election. I figured he'd want to steer clear of this mess, but apparently he'd been getting calls from quite a few residents. Mr. Rourke, he said, I've been reviewing your case file. I have to say, I'm concerned about what I'm seeing. Not just the pool incident, but a pattern of overreach from this HOA. I've got all the timelines, security footage, and property surveys to back it up. I didn't sugarcoat it. They've been operating like a shadow government. Reyes cleared his throat. What would you say if I told you there's been a history of complaints against this particular HOA dating back several years, but no one's ever pursued legal action until now? I'd say people were probably scared, or didn't have the time or resources to fight back. Well, you've got both, apparently. I'm assigning a compliance officer to review the HOA's charter filings and see if they've been meeting city registration standards. If we find irregularities, we'll escalate. That was more than I could have hoped for. I hung up and walked out onto the porch just as Lorraine's husband, Ken, came stomping up the sidewalk. I hadn't seen him get involved before. He was a retired dentist, usually kept to himself, but now he looked ready to burst. You're turning this neighborhood into a circus, he barked. Your wife started it, I said, not backing down. She drained my pool in the middle of the night. Illegally. That's felony-level vandalism. She was protecting the community. She committed a crime. His face turned red. You're going to regret dragging this through the courts. You tell her that if she sets foot on my property again, I'll have her arrested. He stormed off, muttering something about lawyers and leeches. By the weekend, cracks were forming in the facade Lorraine had spent years building. Families who had once whispered behind closed doors now walked openly to my driveway to ask questions. I didn't give them everything, just enough to let them know it wasn't just a spat over a pool. It was bigger. That Sunday, I held a meeting in my garage. Not a formal town hall, just a gathering. I rolled up the door, set out folding chairs, and plugged in a fan. About 20 people showed up, more than I expected. Greg was there, of course. So was a woman named Clarissa, a nurse who'd had fines levied on her for planting unauthorized vegetation. She held up a photo of a rosemary bush. "I'm serious," she said. "They said it didn't match the neighborhood's aesthetic. Charged me $600. A guy named Darren, who ran a landscaping company, mentioned how Lorraine had tried to fine him for parking his work trailer in his own driveway. She said it looked industrial. It's a damn landscaping trailer." I pulled out a packet of copies from my workbench. These are the bylaws, highlighted where they overstepped. I've marked every clause they violated with dates and supporting documents. If you've been targeted, I want to include your case in the motion. Clarissa frowned. "Wait, you're expanding the lawsuit?" "I'm filing a class action motion. If enough of you sign on and provide statements, we can freeze the HOA's authority until the investigation plays out. You don't owe me anything." "I've already paid for the legal team." A murmur went through the group. Hands started going up. People started trading stories. One woman, Maria, said Lorraine had threatened to fine her for hanging a towel over her balcony railing. A towel. On a 90-degree day. They were sick of it. All of them. The next morning, I woke up to find a typed letter slid under my garage door. No envelope. No signature. Just a single sentence. "Back off or someone's gonna get hurt." I called Dana, told her everything. She didn't hesitate. "We're filing a restraining order. And I'm forwarding this to the district attorney's office." I installed a second set of security cameras that afternoon. Front, back, and side angles. Solar-powered, motion-triggered, and backed up to a cloud server. If they thought intimidation would make me blink, they didn't know who they were dealing with. 3 days later, I got a call from the city inspector's office. They completed their inspection of the illegal utility tap. The verdict? Multiple violations, including tampering with municipal infrastructure. The report was being forwarded to the county prosecutor's office. Criminal charges were now on the table. That same day, a city truck rolled up to the utility box behind my fence. I let them in through the side gate. They installed a red tag notice on the HOA's line. Unauthorized tap. Service officially cut until proper permitting could be verified. The city was also initiating an audit of all HOA-controlled infrastructure in the neighborhood. When Lorraine saw the tag, she marched down the street like she was going to explode. This time, she didn't even try to be civil. "You're ruining everything." "This community was peaceful until you got here." "You mean compliant," I said. "There's a difference. You're just bitter. You think you can bully your way into control." "I'm not trying to run anything," I said. "I'm just not letting you run roughshod over people anymore." "You'll be sorry," she said, voice trembling now. "You think you've won, but you don't know who I know." I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Because 2 hours later, a white sedan with government plates pulled up in front of her house. A sheriff's deputy and a city legal officer stepped out and walked up to her door with a folder in hand. They served her right there on the porch. I didn't watch long. I had better things to do, like finishing the paperwork to file for a temporary receivership of the HOA. With enough residents' signatures already gathered and the city's backing, I had a real shot at stripping the current board of their authority while the investigation unfolded. And once that happened, Lorraine would no longer be in charge of anything but her own mess. It was the following Thursday when I got the call from Dana that shifted everything into overdrive. "They're not just in violation of civil code anymore," she said. "The city audit uncovered something buried in the HOA's financials, something big." I set down the wrench I was using to tighten a duct clamp and leaned against my workbench. "How big are we talking?" "They've been collecting dues from over a dozen foreclosed properties that haven't had registered owners in years. The payments were never returned or reported. Worse, those funds were funneled into a private account. It's embezzlement, Vincent. And that's just the headline." My heart pounded. Lorraine hadn't just violated property rights, she'd been running a racket under the HOA's name. Dana continued, "The DA's office has opened a formal investigation. Financial Crimes Division. They're subpoenaing bank records going back 6 years. I didn't say anything for a moment. I stared out the garage window at the street, where a few kids were riding bikes past Maria's house. The same Maria who showed me a stack of fines for letting her daughter run a lemonade stand on the sidewalk. Do they know who controlled the account? I asked. They traced it to Lorraine and 2 other board members. The names matched the signatures on the dues letters. What about the rest of the board? There is no rest of the board, Vincent. That's the point. The HOA hasn't held a legitimate election in nearly 8 years. My hands curled into fists. So what now? They're preparing charges. But here's the twist. Lorraine filed for a community development grant from the city 3 years ago. It was approved. The money was meant for sidewalk repairs and storm drain upgrades. None of that work was ever done. That's public funds, Vincent. I didn't need to hear more. I knew exactly what had to happen next. That evening, I walked over to Greg's place. He was out front replacing a blown sprinkler head. I waited till he stood up and wiped his hands. I need a favor, I said. He nodded without asking what it was. What's going on? We're putting together a formal petition to dissolve the HOA under municipal code. With the financial crimes and the misappropriated grant money, we've got grounds. He whistled softly. You're going for the kill shot. They've ruled over this place like a private kingdom. This is our chance to take it all back. But we need 75% of the homeowners to sign. Greg reached into his garage and pulled out a folding table. Let's start now. We set up in his driveway. By sunset, we had over 30 signatures. People lined up, some with their own copies of old violation letters, others bringing canceled checks and printed emails. One elderly couple even brought a binder full of photos showing how their application to install a wheelchair ramp was denied 3 times under aesthetic integrity. Their daughter, a paralegal, had already submitted a sworn affidavit. The next morning, a black SUV pulled into my driveway. 2 men in suits stepped out. One introduced himself as Investigator Marcus Hale from the County DA's office. The other was with the City Fraud Division. We've obtained a search warrant for the HOA office, Hale said. We'd like you to verify the location of the utility box and access points you mentioned in your injunction. I led them out back and pointed to the locked fence. They took photos, logged coordinates, and thanked me. As they left, I noticed something in the back window of Lorraine's house. Curtains quickly pulled aside, then dropped. By noon, the warrant was executed. I didn't see it myself, but Darren texted me that a team of 5 investigators showed up in unmarked vehicles. They entered the HOA office with bolt cutters and left 2 hours later with 3 computer towers, 7 file boxes, and a printer. That night, Lorraine's house went dark. No porch lights, no cars in the driveway. She was either hiding or gone. The following morning, the city posted a public notice on the HOA community board by the clubhouse. It was a temporary suspension of all HOA activity, pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. A contact number for a city liaison was listed at the bottom. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. There was still work to do. That afternoon, I visited Clarissa. She'd been collecting statements from her side of the neighborhood. I found her sitting at her kitchen table surrounded by documents, photos, letters, even a notarized complaint from a family who'd been fined over a backyard trampoline. She handed me a folder. There's more, she said. I found out Lorraine's daughter was hired as a consultant by the HOA. She's been paid over 20 grand in the last year. No services rendered. There's no record of any actual work. I added the documents to the growing case file. We're going to need all of this for the emergency board hearing. Wait, what hearing? I pulled out a printed notice. The city's calling a special session to appoint a temporary trustee panel to manage the HOA until the investigation concludes. They're doing it next week. Residents are allowed to nominate candidates. Clarissa sat back in her chair. You're running, aren't you? No, I said. You are. You're a nurse. You've lived here longer than I have. You've got first-hand experience with how they targeted people. We need folks like you to keep it balanced. She blinked, surprised. You trust me with that? I trust the people who stood up when it mattered. By Sunday, the petition had cleared the required threshold. Over 75% of homeowners had signed. We submitted it to the city clerk's office. They verified the signatures, and just like that, the process to dissolve the HOA was officially underway. 3 days later, during the special session held in the local community center, over 100 residents filled the room. The city appointed a provisional board made up of 5 residents, including Clarissa and Greg. I sat in the back row, arms crossed, as the city liaison listed out the infractions. Unauthorized disbursement of funds, falsified financial statements, obstruction of municipal oversight, and fraudulent acquisition of public grants. The room was silent. Then the liaison added, all board activity is suspended until further notice. If convicted, the former board members may be liable for restitution to homeowners. Someone clapped, then another. Soon the entire room erupted in applause. Not for revenge, for the end of silence. The following morning, I received a certified letter. It was from the state attorney's office. Lorraine, Ken, and one other board member had been indicted on multiple felony charges, including wire fraud and misuse of public funds. A court date was set for early fall. That same afternoon, a crew from the city arrived to begin the long overdue sidewalk repairs. Paid for by a new grant this time, under proper supervision. I leaned against my porch post and watched them work. Clarissa walked by on her way back from the temporary board meeting, carrying a clipboard and a bag of leftover donuts. She stopped at my gate. We're holding a community barbecue next weekend, she said. To celebrate. You better show up. I'll bring the grill, I said. As she walked on, I thought about everything that had led to this point. A drained pool. A useless letter. A woman who thought she could run a neighborhood like a dictatorship. She picked the wrong house. And now she would answer for all of it. Not just to me, but to everyone she tried to control. The community barbecue was set for Saturday at noon, and by 10 that morning, the smell of smoked brisket and grilled onions already drifted down Sycamore Lane. Fold-out tables lined the sidewalk, draped in mismatched tablecloths. Kids darted between lawn chairs, dragging balloons. Someone brought a speaker, and the old gospel station played Marvin Gaye and Al Green like it was a block party from the 70s. I kept to the side, flipping burgers and rotating a pan of ribs on my smoker. It wasn't about me anymore. The neighborhood had cracked open like a shell, and something real had poured out. People who'd barely spoken to each other for years were now trading stories, comparing notes, laughing like the past decade hadn't been soaked in tension. Clarissa walked up with a clipboard tucked under her arm. Her scrubs swapped for jeans and a faded concert tee. She handed me a bottle of water and leaned against the fence. We had our first provisional board audit this morning, she said. Found a locked cabinet in the HOA office with 24 uncashed checks. Most of them from homeowners who'd paid in advance for driveway permits that were never processed. I wiped my hands on a towel. Let me guess, none of those funds ever hit the HOA account? She shook her head, eyes tight with something more than frustration. We're talking over $20,000. And not a cent used for anything they claimed it was for. Did the city liaison see it? Filed it immediately. They've already frozen the last remaining HOA account. The forensic accountant said it's one of the sloppiest embezzlement jobs she's seen in years. I didn't laugh. It wasn't funny anymore. The deeper they dug, the more the rot spread. This wasn't just abuse of power, it was theft, plain and simple. And while Lorraine was still hiding behind her lawyer, the justice system was catching up fast. Just as I was covering the ribs with foil, Greg walked up, holding a manila envelope. You're gonna want to see this, he said. One of the guys from the county recorder's office dropped it off. Said it was flagged in the HOA's filings after the subpoena went through. He handed it over. I opened the flap and pulled out a stack of scanned documents. Property deeds. Title transfers. Most were routine, but one caught my eye. You see it? Greg asked. I nodded slowly. This is my address. The document was a fake. A forged easement agreement dated 6 months before I moved in. It claimed the HOA had perpetual access to a 5-foot wide strip of my land, including utility rights, maintenance authority, and inspection freedom. That's not my signature, I said. It isn't anyone's, Greg replied. The notary listed on it passed away 4 years ago. The seal's been lifted from an old public record. They'd forged a legal document to justify tapping into my utilities. And they'd buried it so deep it took a court-ordered audit to bring it to the surface. I flipped to the next page. It was a scanned email recovered from the HOA's old laptop. Lorraine had sent it to her treasurer, instructing them to create a fallback easement agreement in case of resistance. Her exact words. I looked up at Greg. This isn't just fraud. It's document fabrication. That's a felony on its own. Greg nodded. City attorneys already filed a supplemental charge. DA's adding it to the list. I tucked the envelope under my arm as Clarissa returned, this time with a man in a dark gray suit trailing behind her. He looked out of place among the flip-flops and paper plates. She introduced him as Assistant District Attorney Harold Levin. He extended a hand to me. Mr. Rourke, I don't usually do site visits, but this one warranted an exception. You here to confirm the easement forgery? That and to thank you. Your documentation, footage, and testimony are the cornerstone of our case. You forced this open. Without it, we'd still be chasing ghosts. What about the rest of the board? I asked. Anyone else facing charges? He nodded. The treasurer confessed to altering financial records in exchange for a reduced sentence. Gave us everything. Lorraine's looking at a minimum of 12 charges, 3 of them federal. Wire fraud, forgery, and misuse of public funds. Trial. Preliminary hearings set for next month. The judge fast-tracked it. I watched as kids dipped plastic cups in a cooler full of lemonade. Maria's daughter handed one to her grandfather, who sat grinning in the shade of a maple tree. What happens to the HOA now? I asked. Levin adjusted his tie. You filed for dissolution. 60-day review window. Given the volume of criminal findings and the community vote, it will be approved. After that, the provisional board becomes a neighborhood council. No dues. No enforcement authority. Just a group of residents who volunteer to coordinate things like block parties and safety patrols. No bureaucracy? He smiled. Just neighbors. Clarissa approached again, this time laughing as she handed me a folder of nominations. Someone wrote your name in 5 times for permanent chair. No thanks. I'm sticking with HVAC and smoked meats. Suit yourself, she said. But you better show up for the meetings. We'll need someone to keep us honest. By dusk, the party dwindled. Folding chairs were stacked, leftovers boxed. Someone played an old acoustic guitar near the end of the block, soft enough to fade into the crickets. I sat on my porch with a cold drink, watching as the last of the tables were hauled off. Greg walked past, gave a quiet nod. No words needed. The next morning, a plain white truck parked in front of Lorraine's house. 2 federal agents stepped out and walked to her door. She opened it, still in a robe, eyes sunken and hair undone. They read her the warrant, cuffed her without resistance, and placed her into the back seat. No one clapped. No one jeered. We just watched as the woman who'd ruled this neighborhood through fear and manipulation was driven away to face the consequences. And then we got back to living. 2 weeks later, the city officially approved the HOA's dissolution. The office was cleared out. The sign removed. The building was redesignated as a community resource hub. Clarissa proposed using it for tutoring, weekend classes, and food drives. The first event was a CPR training for new parents. I didn't attend the meetings. I didn't sit on the new board. But I kept my cameras up, my paperwork in order, and my gate locked. Not out of fear. Just out of principle. One afternoon, I pulled out the old easement forgery and framed it. Not as a trophy. As a reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked. Of what it takes to stand your ground. The pool? It's filled again. Blue, clean, and quiet. Just the way I like it. And this time, no one touches it but me.